Faith Church. We're carrying on our devotions today. We're into 2 Kings chapter 6, and we're going to go right through to chapter 8. And I just titled this one, In the Presence of My Enemies. I thought of the 23rd Psalm and just how God works in the presence of our enemies. But we're going to see a couple stories here. We have the Syrian army has been oppressing Israel for years. And so we have a couple of those situations again. So it starts off first in chapter 6, 2 Kings. We have the Syrian king is trying to, has these raiding parties in Israel and trying to capture them and capture different things. But God starts revealing this to Elisha. And so Elisha, every time they set a trap to catch some Israelites, Elisha finds out about it. God tells Elisha, and Elisha tells the king of Israel, and they avoid it. And so this is really frustrating the Syrian king. And so he brings his own army in and says, like, hey, you guys who's on the other side? Which one of you is a traitor? Because every time we make plans, it's like Israel knows what we're doing. And they say, it's not us, king. It's Elisha. It's this prophet. He knows what you're doing and saying, even in your bedroom. It says, even the thoughts you have in your bedroom, Elisha knows what they are, as God reveals it to him. And so the king, in anger, says, where's this prophet? Let's go kill him. So he sends his army out, and they surround this, what would have been a really small little town where Elisha was staying. And so I just picture this. Elisha wakes up the next morning. Actually, his servant wakes up first and walks out, and here's the Syrian army surrounding this little village that Elisha is staying at. And of course, the servant is terrified. I mean, wouldn't we all be, right? And he's terrified. And he goes and tells Elisha, and Elisha's just kind of like not scared at all. And the servant doesn't understand why. And Elisha says, well, because those who are with us is greater than them. And Gehazi's like, it's just the two of them against an entire army. And so Elisha prays, and God opens his eyes, and he sees this angel army. If you know that song from Chris Tomlin, it's from this story. The God of angel armies is always by my side. I won't sing it for you. You can Google it. But he reveals that army, and all of a sudden everything changes for Gehazi. He goes from being terrified to having full confidence. And so the army God strikes the Syrian army with blindness. And Elisha then comes out and leads them, says, I'll take you to them, and leads them right to the center of Samaria, the capital of Israel, surrounded by the Israel army. And then God restores their sight, and they're captured. They're surrounded. And the Israel king says, okay, Elisha, what should we do now? Should we kill them all? And this is another kind of interesting piece. Elisha says, no, feed them, give them a feast and send them home. And so he does. And but they're spared nonetheless. And it says that for a while there, they didn't do raids on Israel anymore. So we'll come back to a couple things from that, but we're going to look at the second bit of this story. And the next part is, once again, Syria is attacking Israel. This time there's a famine in the land already, and the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, gets his army and he lays siege to the city of Samaria. That's the capital city of Israel. And laying siege just means they surround it so no one can go in or out, and they basically just starve the people to death. And so that's what's happening. There's just really horrible things that are happening during this siege. The Israelites are resorting to cannibalism, and just because they have no food, and some really horrible things. And the king, it kind of hits a breaking point. He just lashes out in anger, and he says, it's all God's fault. It's all Elisha's fault. Go find Elisha and kill him. I want his head on a platter. And so they sends out his soldiers to do this, but God reveals it to Elisha that he's coming. And so the soldiers show up, and Elisha says, don't worry, by tomorrow you're going to have all the food you could ever want. And this captain of the guard that came to arrest Elisha doesn't believe him, and says, like, even God couldn't do that. Even if God opened up the stores of heaven, he couldn't do that. And so he doubts. But then it goes in to kind of tell the story of course, God's going to do what he said. And so the story goes that there's these 4 lepers. It switches to these 4 lepers. And these 4 lepers kind of come to this conclusion that if they stay outside Samaria, they're going to die and starve to death. And so they think our best chance, why don't we head over to the Syrian army? And if they kill us, well, we're going to die anyways. At least it might be quick. And if they don't, well, then maybe they'll put us to work or something in exchange for food. So these lepers go out, and when they get to the huge Syrian army camp, there's none there. It's abandoned. And there's just all the supplies for a huge military operation. There's food everywhere, and as well as gold and clothes and weapons and tents and everything else. And so these lepers just start grabbing everything they can and taking it home. And then they realize, they kind of see, like, we've got this city of people that are starving to death, and we're hoarding all this to ourselves. So they go, oh, the right thing is to go and tell them. So they go and tell the Israelites in the city of Samaria. And at first the king doesn't believe them. They send out a scouting party, but they confirm it's true. And so the people of Samaria go out, and they basically take everything from the camp. And the Bible tells us that what God did is that in the night, the whole army, Syrian army, heard the sound of chariots and an army coming to attack them. And they believed that Israel had hired the Egyptians. And so they flee. They run away with such terror. God incited such terror in their minds that they ran away from, I guess you could say, an invisible army once again. And they flee and they leave everything behind. And the Israelites are able to collect all the food and everything, and they're saved. And so after looking at those 2 stories, we have a couple things here. We look at when we're in difficult times, our tendency to blame God or get angry, like the Israel king did. But we need to remember that, one, God is always watching. He's always aware. There's nothing that he doesn't know. We see this in the way that Elisha knew what the king of Syria was thinking in his bedroom. God revealed that to him. We see that in knowing that the captain of the guard was coming and what he was going to ask. We know God is always watching and that he knows. And then we know God is fighting for us, even when we can't see this angel army that Gehazi couldn't see until Elisha asked God to open his eyes to be able to see this invisible army that God had to protect them. The other invisible army that chased away this huge Syrian army, this sound that terrified them and made them flee. God fights for us in ways we can't see. And he's gracious, and he will provide. It's kind of neat that God forgave that first raiding party. Instead of, you would think that they were surrounded in Samaria, that they would just be killed, but instead, God is gracious and tells the king of Israel to feed them and send them on their way. Our God is a forgiving God. And then God provides. He provides food from the Syrian camp and an end to the siege for Israel. And so when we come into difficult times, we can trust those things. God's always watching. He's fighting for us in ways we can't see. And he is gracious and forgiving and will provide. So with that, let that be an encouragement to you as you go about your day. And may God bless you and keep you. And today, would you know his peace? God bless.